mill iron site is really one of the cornerstones of archaeology in Montana, in that it is one of the basal sites, the earliest archaeological sites that we have in the state.
Another BLM archaeologist and I were required to go out and take a look at a reservoir that had been leaking.
In the process of going out and having that dam inspected, the archaeologists on site recognized that there was nearby eroding out of this perched block of sediment. And in looking around that, they identified these Pleistocene, undoubtedly Pleistocene age projectile points coming out of it.
And we found 4 of those projectile points around this periphery of this hill in a placement that suggested that they were buried somewhere in that soil. There was enough there that we wanted to make sure that the excavating equipment didn't tear up something that was important.
That really is the only fragment or remnant of that landform in the entire valley. It's been washed away everywhere else, but there's just some really unique features that allowed this little chunk of it to be preserved. And then amazingly enough, trapped within that little chunk of preserved sediment is a really amazing Pleistocene age archaeological site. And it was only because of the NHPA that the archaeologists were out there. The projectile points, the artifacts that are associated with the site are what we refer to as being Goshen in age, and that really derives from the style of the projectile point. The projectile point's morphology is a marker, a temporal marker, and it says to us that this site in the suite of sites and ages based on sort of a stratigraphic perspective lies at the very bottom amongst the earliest sites that we have in all of Western North America, really, but certainly on the Northern Plains and certainly here in Montana. We don't have a lot of evidence for residents, long-term residents at this site. What we have is emblematic of the actual event of the taking of those bison.
We know that they were hunting bison, an extinct form of bison, and they were using tools that they manufactured from local stone and stone from far distant.
So we're using an atlatl or a throwing spear, something that offers some mechanical advantage beyond just simply something that's thrown by hand attached to a spear. And these are not bison that are representative of the bison that you would have in Yellowstone National Park, for instance. Today, these are an extinct form of bison.
These are bigger bison.
It's a truly staggering sized animal. We have a group of individuals that were successful in hunting, was it roughly 40 bison?
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think it was roughly 40 bison, and doing so with, they were successful at taking 40 of the bison, so we have the remains of 40 bison.
So that you take the probability of finding an ancient site where Native Americans camped and did things, combined with the fact that nature itself has removed most of those soils, it's an extremely rare event.
Yeah.
So, extremely important site.
The Absaroka Agency was put in place to assist with the Crow tribe in their transition from hunter-gatherers ostensibly into farmers, which is what the U.S. government wanted them to become.
The Crow tribe decided at this site to change their traditional way of life from hunters and gatherers to farmers. So that was a big turning point in the Crow tribe's history.
The government started building cabins for Crow people who wanted to take up agriculture. So that was the government's way of trying to confine the people to the reservation and getting them to change their traditional way of life. Take up agriculture. They offered incentives. We'll give you the land, we'll give you all the equipment you need, we'll give you the seed. Of course, forgetting about the fact that these are people who had never before tried farming, you know. I don't know if you can find many places in American Indian history where you can say it was at this point, at this time, that this native tribe made the decision to abandon their traditional way of life. And it happened at the second agency. The Crow have a name for that period of the second agency, living within the lines drawn on the ground, which I think is such an amazing description of that time. That's incredibly important, and that's when it happened and where it happened.
I think most people thought there was nothing left of that area, that it had been farmed and ranched for over 100 years, and that the likelihood that there would be anything left in the ground, any remnants of that fort, would be a long shot.
The location of the agency was generally very well known, the general location, but no one knew if anything had survived of the agency, because a good part of it occurred in a agricultural field, a hay field that had been plowed for nearly 100 years. In the case of the second agency, the Montana Department of Transportation was planning on rebuilding the highway that runs right through the center of the agency location. So we went out there and we did we found a few things on the surface, and we found a few things doing some really small-scale shovel probing. And it's sort of, what we found sort of hinted at maybe the fact that there's more left out there than a lot of us thought in the past. And we ended up identifying the entire footprint of the main compound of the agency. Still there, the foundation footprint was still there. What's important to those of us in archaeology who study lifeways of Native people is the material culture that was left behind at the artifacts. Because this was a time when the Crow had not lost all knowledge of elements of traditional economy, industry, of traditional artifact manufacture. We found several pieces of bottle glass that had been modified into scraping tools. You can clearly see the flake scars. Supposedly the Crow had lost all knowledge of how to manufacture chipstone tools. And here we find 3, 4, 5 tools made out of glass. Right alongside, literally right next to one of these glass scraping tools was a cylinder with .32 caliber cap and ball revolver. I mean, that's that juxtaposition of cultures. So it didn't really have to resort to traditional chipstone technology. We sort of wonder, was there an elder that just preferred the old ways? The basic elements of that artifact are right there, just as Crow culture. It's still here. It's endured.
The National Historic Preservation Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we have in this nation, especially for American Indian people. When you consider the fact that we've been here for over 10,000 years, that's 10,000 years of history that we have in the ground here, and all of that is protected by this act. And I just really think that you can't understate the importance of that.
I think in general, the whole take-home from archaeology is it gives you, again, a sense of a greater temporal depth than just your own existence.
One of the things that it does for critical thinkers is that it demands that you ask questions about the past, and how did these things occur, and how did these things unfold.